What if the key to your health, the secrets hidden in your veins, could be unlocked with a single, painless drop of blood? Imagine a world without big needles, without anxious waits for lab results. Now, what if the company promising this revolution, a company valued at $9 billion, led by a figure hailed as the next Steve Jobs, was built on a technology that never, ever worked? Our story begins in the heart of Silicon Valley, a landscape of dreamers and disruptors. It was here in 2003 that a 19-year-old Stanford dropout named Elizabeth Holmes founded a company that would promise to change the world. She was a visionary, a messianic figure in a uniform of a black turtleneck, with a commanding, deep voice and an unblinking, intense stare that mesmerized all who met her. Her company was called Theranos, a portmanteau of therapy and diagnosis. Its mission was nothing short of miraculous: to democratize healthcare. Holmes claimed to have invented a proprietary technology that could run hundreds of complex blood tests, from cholesterol levels to cancer markers, from a single, tiny drop of blood pricked from a fingertip. The promise was embodied in a small, sleek black box she called the Edison machine. This device was supposed to be the centerpiece of a new era of preventative medicine, placed in every home, pharmacy, and military battlefield. It was a story so powerful, so seductive, that it seemed destined to be true. The only problem was the machine was a complete and utter fiction. For over a decade, Holmes built her empire on this beautiful lie. She attracted a star-studded board of directors that included former secretaries of state like Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, military generals, and titans of industry. These powerful, older men were captivated by her charisma and vision, lending her an almost unassailable shield of credibility. She raised more than $700 million from some of the world's most sophisticated investors, including Rupert Murdoch and the Walton family. They poured fortunes into the Theranos without ever seeing audited financials or demanding independent verification of the technology. They weren't investing in a product. They were investing in the myth of Elizabeth Holmes. By her side was her number two, the enigmatic and intimidating company president, Ramesh Sunny Balwani. He was her business partner, her enforcer, and in a secret kept from the board and investors, her romantic partner. Together, they cultivated a corporate culture of extreme secrecy, paranoia, and fear, a place where questioning the technology was a cardinal sin. Inside the walls of the Theranos, a very different story was unfolding. The engineers and scientists hired to build the dream knew the truth. They were wrestling with a machine that consistently failed, that produced wildly inaccurate results, and that was nowhere near capable of performing the miracles Holmes was promising to the world. The Edison machines were unreliable and could perform only a tiny fraction of the advertised tests. To cover this up, the Theranos began a shocking deception. When they received blood samples from patients, they would secretly run the tests on commercially available, traditional blood testing machines made by companies like Siemens, while pretending the results came from their own revolutionary technology. The first true whispers of the rot within came from a man who should have been one of its greatest champions. Ian Gibbons, the company's chief scientist and a brilliant Cambridge-educated biochemist, knew the technology was a fraud. He was systematically silenced, marginalized, and threatened with lawsuits by Holmes when he tried to voice his concerns. Gibbons was trapped. He saw a freight train of deception heading for a cliff, and he was being forced to ride in the front car. The pressure became unbearable. In 2013, just before he was scheduled to testify in a lawsuit where he knew he would have to expose the company's lies, Ian Gibbons took his own life. The next wave of doubt came from a new generation of employees. A young lab worker named Erica Chum was hired in 2013. She was a true believer, excited to be part of a company changing the world. But she was horrified by what she found: a lab in chaos, where failed quality control checks were ignored and patient samples were being processed on faulty machines. Around the same time, another young employee began to see the cracks. His name was Tyler Schultz. He was smart, idealistic, and also happened to be the grandson of board member and former Secretary of State, George Shultz. Tyler, like Chun, witnessed the scientific fraud firsthand and knew that the company was endangering patients' lives. Together, though they didn't know it at the time, Chun and Schultz decided they had to act. They were two young people, barely out of college, going up against a $9 billion behemoth, a company defended by one of the most powerful lawyers in the country, David Boies. And in Tyler's case, he was going up against his own grandfather. Their concerns eventually found their way to the one person who could truly challenge the myth. John Carreyrou, a two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, received a tip from a medical expert who thought the Theranos sounded like a scam. Carreyrou began to dig, making quiet calls, seeking out former employees. The investigation was a masterclass in journalistic persistence. Carreyrou was met with a wall of silence, terror, and non-disclosure agreements. The Theranos unleashed its legal attack dogs, threatening him and his sources, trying to intimidate the journal into killing the story. But Carreyrou was relentless. He eventually connected with Tyler Schultz, who became his secret, inside source. The breakthrough, the moment the world's perception of the Theranos began to crack, was October 15, 2015. On that day, the Wall Street Journal published Carreyrou's first explosive article, titled "A Prize Startup Struggles." It laid out the core of the deception, the failed technology, the use of commercial analyzers, and the doctored results. The illusion was shattered. Holmes went on a media offensive, appearing on CNBC with her unblinking stare, famously declaring, "This is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world." It was a magnificent performance, but the damage was done. Carreyrou's reporting opened the floodgates. Regulators who had been asleep at the wheel for years were now forced to act. The FDA and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, launched their own investigations. A CMS report later found that the Theranos lab in California posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. The dominoes began to fall with breathtaking speed. Walgreens, their biggest partner, sued to terminate its relationship and shuttered the Theranos wellness centers in its stores. The $9 billion valuation, once a symbol of Silicon Valley's genius, evaporated, becoming a symbol of its hubris. In 2018, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission charged the Theranos, Holmes, and Balwani with orchestrating a massive fraud. Holmes was stripped of her control of the company and barred from serving as an officer or director of a public company for 10 years. But the civil charges were just the beginning. A few months later, the Department of Justice announced criminal charges. A federal grand jury indicted both Holmes and Balwani on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The legal net that had been closing for 3 years had finally tightened. On September 5, 2018, the company that had promised to change the world sent a final email to its shareholders. The Theranos, once the brightest star in Silicon Valley, was officially dissolving. The lie had finally run out of money and time. The subsequent legal proceedings became one of the most watched trials in recent history. The trial of Elizabeth Holmes was a spectacle, delayed by the pandemic and her own pregnancy. She took the stand in her own defense, a risky and dramatic move. Her defense was a stunning pivot. She claimed she had been a true visionary, but that she had been manipulated and psychologically, emotionally, and sexually abused by the much older Sunny Balwani. She portrayed herself not as a master con artist, but as another one of his victims, a pawn in his game. The jury was not entirely convinced by her defense, but the verdict was split. On January 3, 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors. She was, however, acquitted on the charges related to defrauding patients, a distinction that many found baffling. Sunny Balwani was tried separately and convicted on all 12 felony counts of fraud. He was seen by the jury as a willing and active participant in the entire scheme. Justice, it seemed, had finally been delivered. In late 2022, the sentences came down. Elizabeth Holmes was sentenced to more than 11 years in federal prison. Sunny Balwani received a sentence of nearly 13 years. The 2 architects of the massive fraud were finally being held accountable, not just for the money they stole, but for the lives they endangered. The aftermath of the Theranos collapse was a wasteland of broken promises and ruined lives. The investors lost their fortunes. The employees lost their jobs and had their reputations tarnished. But the most tragic victims were the patients who had received false blood test results, people who had made real-life medical decisions based on fictional data. The legacy of the Theranos is a dark and complex cautionary tale. It's a story about the intoxicating power of a good narrative, especially in a place like Silicon Valley, which is built on selling visions of the future. Holmes wasn't just selling a product. She was selling a story about herself as a female Steve Jobs. The scandal exposed a catastrophic failure of due diligence at the highest levels of business and finance. It revealed how easily powerful, intelligent men could be seduced by a charismatic young woman who told them exactly what they wanted to hear, confirming their own wisdom for backing a winner. It also became a case study in the dark side of fake it till you make it, a mantra often celebrated in the tech world. The Theranos proved that this philosophy, when applied to people's health, isn't just reckless, it's potentially lethal. There is a profound difference between a buggy app and a faulty medical diagnosis. The heroes of the story were the whistleblowers, the young, often terrified employees like Tyler Schultz and Erica Chun, and the dogged journalist John Carreyrou. They risked their careers and their well-being to expose the truth, proving that conscience and integrity can still prevail against immense power and intimidation. And so, the story of the Theranos leaves us with a deeply unsettling question for our modern age. In a world that idolizes charismatic founders and moves at the speed of hype, how do we tell the difference between a true visionary and a gifted storyteller? And how many drops of blood are we willing to risk to find out?